For the many thousands of adventurers who make the climb each year, it's this bridge over the River Nevis that marks the very start of the journey to summit the UK's tallest mountain, Ben Nevis. At 1,345 metres, it's not exactly Everest, and it's not even especially tall by international standards, but here on the relatively flat British Isles, that's as tall as it gets. We climbed a couple of stiles before the dirt track gave way to an upward stony path that was to become the first part of the climb, and it was an excellent path. This route is known as a pony track and was originally built at the end of the 1800s, as the name suggests, to allow ponies to reach the top. They were loaded with supplies or construction materials for the observatory and small hotel that used to stand at the summit, but have since closed and fallen into ruin. As a publicity stunt, Ford even once drove a Model T up these paths and to the top in 1911. Granted, the ascent took 5 days, but hopefully that gives you some insight into just how comfortable these paths can be. That said, I don't mean to downplay it for anyone who's looking to climb themselves. It's by no means easy, and in bad conditions it can be an exceptionally dangerous climb.
This view's just incredible, isn't it?
Even just a short way up, the perfectly clear sky offered sweeping views over the Glen Nevis Valley, and the sun had just begun to creep over the mountains and illuminate the grassy slopes. But whilst it made for ideal views, it made for less than ideal climbing conditions. It got hot, and very quickly.
So we're an hour in, the jumpers are off, it's really warm.
And once we turned the corner into the Valley of the Red Burn, there was no shade whatsoever.
This is starting to get really tough in the heat now.
The Red Burn is the name of the stream that runs down the mountain and essentially cuts the climb in half. Incidentally, it's also what happens to pale and unprepared Englishmen who make the climb during summer.
So it's just turned 9 AM, we're in Scotland and it's boiling hot. This doesn't make any sense. All we can think about is finding shade, there's just none up here, it's unreal.
But before you reach the stream, you reach a relatively flat and grassy plateau, home to a lake called Loch and Meal, which I've almost certainly pronounced incorrectly. It's widely known as the Halfway Lake, although at 570 metres, that name's more than a little optimistic.
Don't know how clearly you can make it out, but this line here is people. And we follow it up there. Give you some perspective on that, zoom out. That's where we're heading. Hopefully there's going to be some shade.
Still, it's nice to have some flat ground for a few minutes, and there were also some tiny streams of ice-cold water that provided some temporary relief from the now oppressive heat.
Oh, it's cold.
It's so cold though to put on my face.
It's freezing, isn't it?
It wasn't long until we'd reached the Red Burn stream itself, as it cascaded down the rocks in a half-hearted waterfall. In harsher weather, it can prove treacherous to cross with strong gushing currents and slippery rocks, but today it was no trouble at all. Now it's probably a bit more accurate to call this halfway. At the very least, it functions as a clear sort of separation of the two halves of the climb, where the grassy and well-maintained stony steps give way to the craggy and lifeless scree. And even up here, there was no escaping the sun. I realise I'm going on about the heat a lot, but it really was all we could think about. Ben Nevis is only said to be clear for about 10 days a year. The name for it in Scottish Gaelic literally translates as the mountain with its head in the clouds. This upper half is normally very bleak with exceptionally poor visibility, and if it isn't raining or snowing, it's bitterly cold. And yet here we were, moaning about how hot it was.
It's so hot.
We could see right down to Fort William, the town where we'd be spending the night, and what clouds there were cast these tiny shadows that we could follow as they danced across the hills and the Caledonian forest. And all of a sudden, one of those clouds decided to grace us with some shade.
Shade. Tanya, we're in shade. It's literally the first time since we started that we've been in shade.
Given the heat, it came as something of a shock when we saw a patch of snow.
Look at that. Snow.
It was unexpected, but not unwelcome.
Is it more like ice?
actual snow.
That final stretch zigzagging between the cairns seemed to take forever. It all looked the same, grey loose rocks and a sky that had now almost entirely clouded over, in typical British fashion, right when we wanted it to be clear and offer us its finest views. But it brought with it shade, so we weren't complaining, and at least the clouds were high up and not shrouding the mountain, as they so often do.
We're so nearly at the top now, I can't wait.
And soon, the summit was in sight. After a climb of 1,345 metres, we'd finally made it, the summit of Ben Nevis, the very top of the United Kingdom. We explored the ruins of the old observatory, and peered inside the storm shelter. And of course we took the customary photo at the trig point, the precise tallest spot. But then we just sat. We'd made it. There we were, having climbed through blistering heat and yet past snow that had somehow survived on this uncharacteristically hot Scottish day. And yeah, the sky might have completely clouded over, but at least we were getting the full Ben Nevis experience. We were on top of the world, after what had been a truly great British adventure.